Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of Check with Tech, your guide to all things tech. I'm your host Yaseen Azzam, and let's get started, shall we? First things first, Realme is back with another phone. The Realme X3 Super Zoom is Realme's latest flagship and is, spoiler alert, coming to the UK before India, which is a first for Realme. So let's talk about this phone. The X3 Super Zoom has a 6.6-inch 1080p screen with a 120Hz refresh rate, which is nice. It has the not-so-new Snapdragon 855 Plus, which is fast, but not as fast as the 865. You get a 4200 mAh battery and a 30-watt charging brick on the box with USB-C charging, so that's good. Now for the cameras, on the back you get an 8-megapixel telephoto camera with 5x optical zoom, a 64-megapixel main camera, an 8-megapixel ultra-wide camera, and a 2-megapixel macro mode. Because everyone needs a little bit of macro lenses in their quad camera setup. Yes. Although there's no official IP rating, Realme does claim that there are 3 waterproof layers in the phone's body, which basically helps it become more water and dust resistant. In Europe, the Realme X3 Super Zoom is only available in one configuration, which is 12 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage, which will cost around 500 euros, which is around $550, and £469, which is equal to around $575 in the UK. You get 2 color options, white and blue, and the phone is set to begin sales on June 4th. Now, if you want to get a good phone with good performance and really good pricing, then this is the phone you want. But be careful, it's not an OLED panel on the display, it's an LCD. But still, if you want the 120Hz in less than $600, I would recommend this phone. And now to shift things over to Redmi, not Realme. They just announced their new 10X lineup with their 10X Pro and their 10X 5G. It's not Pro 5G, it's just 5G. So what's so Pro or 5G about it? Well, let's see. Both phones have a 6.57-inch AMOLED display with FHD Plus resolution, which also supports HDR10 and 10 Plus, but at only 60 Hz, which is surprising at these times, but it's passable. You get the MediaTek Dimensity 820. You get 4,520 mAh battery with up to 9-watt charging in the box, which is a lot in this year. For the cameras, you get 4 cameras or 3 depending on the model. For the 10X Pro, you get a 48-megapixel main camera, an 8-megapixel ultra-wide camera, an 8-megapixel OIS telephoto with 30 times digital zoom, and a 5-megapixel macro camera, because every phone needs to have a separate macro lens. That's for the 10X Pro. For the 10X 5G, you get 48-megapixel main camera, an 8-megapixel ultra-wide camera, and a 2-megapixel depth sensor. You get 8GB of RAM on the 10X Pro with 128 or 256 GB of storage, and 6 or 8 GB of RAM on the 10X 5G with 64 all the way to 256 gigs of storage. Both of them UFS 2.1 speed. Both phones are available now, and the 10X 5G starts at around $224, which is extremely low. And the 10X Pro will start at $322, which is more expensive, but not as expensive as the competition. And they come in 4 colors: Twilight Purple, Deep Ocean Blue, Starlight White, and Lunar Gold. But what shocks me the most is that, 1, there is a headphone jack, which is weird in phones nowadays, and NFC is only available in the 10X Pro, but not the 5G variant. Why? I mean, why would you remove NFC, which is something a lot of people use daily? Why would you remove it from a 5G phone? I mean, I get that there has to be some compromises to make the price as low as possible, but why keep the headphone jack but remove NFC? And now we go to Sony, which has had a pretty ambitious week so far. They announced the ZV-1 vlogging camera, which is great in my opinion, but we're not going to talk about that. Instead, we're going to talk about the weirdest name in a phone yet, the Xperia 1 Mark II. Yes, rather than just calling it the Xperia 2, we'll call it the Xperia 1 Mark II. I mean, you could have gotten rid of the 1 completely and just call it the Xperia Mark II, but that's not important. Let's get to the actual phone itself. The Sony Xperia 1 Mark II has a 6.5-inch 4K HDR OLED 60Hz screen with a really narrow 21:9 aspect ratio, which is 1, slim, and 2, I think the size of most movie formats, I think. It supports the Snapdragon 865 processor, a 4000 mAh battery, which is small for the size. For the cameras, you get a triple camera setup on the back, a 12 megapixel f1.7 main camera, a 12 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide camera, and a 12 megapixel f2.4 telephoto camera. So yes, on all 3 cameras, you get a 12 megapixel sensor. But not on the front, you get an 8 megapixel selfie camera. You get 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. If you want 5G on this phone, you need to live in Europe to get the full advantages of 5G, because you can't get 5G on this phone if you live in the US, which is strange. But then again, we don't depend on 5G a lot because it's still in its very early development. The phone is both IP65 and IP68 water and dust resistant. It will start shipping in July 24th, and it will start at $1,200. Pre-orders start on June 1st, and if you do pre-order them before June 28th, you get a free pair of Sony WF-1000X M3 noise cancelling earbuds. So basically, if you want this phone, I would recommend pre-ordering before June 28th, so you can get a new pair of a truly wireless earbuds for free. With the terrible naming of the Xperia 1 Mark II, you get the Xperia 10 Mark II, because Sony really wants to stick with the Mark name, even with the number before it. And you would think that the Xperia 10 Mark II is better than the Xperia 1 Mark II, but it's the actual opposite. I just don't like the naming on these phones, but let's jump into this phone. So the Xperia 10 Mark II has a 6-inch, the same aspect ratio, 1080p OLED display with the Snapdragon 665 processor and the 3600 mAh battery. You get the same camera setup, except on 2 of the 3 cameras you get 8 megapixel instead of 12 megapixel. I don't think people will complain a lot, but okay. The weird thing about this phone is Sony is planning to ship this phone in select markets this spring. The only complaint I have on these phones is the naming, but other than that, they look good. I mean, it's a Sony phone. I mean, you can get the quality of the build, but the problem is not a lot of people know in the first place that Sony does phones. Yeah, I mean, if Sony had better marketing, they could be successful with the 1 Mark II, even though they don't put Mark in the name. I mean, I know a lot of people will call it the Xperia 1 or 10 II. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the tiny topics. Remember the Moto G8? It's now called the Moto G in the US. The Moto G stylus is known as the Moto G Pro in Europe. Google Stadia gets a new 1440p streaming option only on desktops. Any other device, nuh-uh. Spotify got rid of its 10,000 song limit on your playlists. You can now run Fortnite at 90 frames per second only on OnePlus 8 series devices. And Tidal now streams Dolby Atmos music to any soundbar and TV that is compatible with them. And that, ladies and gentlemen, closes the book on everything that happened this week. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure to listen to the other episodes in the podcast, and don't be afraid to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. As always, this is Yaseen Azzam signing out. See you next weekend.